Okay, Commissioners, we're going to skip to item 3.
That's right.
This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, 32-11 Douglas Road in the Douglaston Historic District. The property is currently a vacant lot. Application is to construct a house. Item 3, Commissioners, we're skipping ahead to item 3.
Oh, we're there. Yeah, we're moving forward to item,
Wait a minute, we just got.
no, this is not,
Going to 3.
no, this is item 4?
Commissioners, seems to be a mistake in the packet. It's
Okay.
labeled as item 2 in your packet. It's item 3 on the agenda list, so it's 32 Douglas Road.
Got it.
32-11 Douglas Road.
Well, it's not number 3.
No, because there's no sheet for them.
We found out that the staff read that comment. They're really upset.
Let's see if we have a fire. That's the fire. We got the fire. Rain? Which one, the rain?
Chris, did you have to do that?
Had to.
He wants to leave now.
Attention, please. This is your fire and life safety director. We received an alarm from the 22nd floor. This is currently under investigation. Please stand by for further announcements.
Okay.
Hot air rises. It's all good.
Wow, famous last
Commissioners,
words.
this is Waiver Preservation staff. 32-11 Douglas Road.
I feel like a mouse.
It's an emergency, otherwise we'd be dead by the time they get to the announcement.
That's the alarm. This is the alarm. Three.
Yeah.
It's a good sign.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, which commissioner pulled the fire alarm?
The stove's not on, so life is good.
Is that-
After a while, that'll make you crazy.
Yeah, that's it.
As I was saying, 3211 Douglas Road is an empty lot. You've actually seen a proposal on this site before. This is the lot here. As you can see, it is on the very edge of the district on the waterfront. Here is the lot right over here. And those of you who saw this previously may recall that because of its location on the waterfront, it's a very challenging lot. There are a lot of regulations that require that it be elevated to a certain height, and it's restricted as far as where they can actually build on the site. So the owners have hired a new architect who's starting with a completely new design, and Phil Metropolis will show you the new proposal.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good morning, Commissioners. Philip Metropolis, the architect for this project. Geez, what an exciting way to start today. You had mechanical system in the first item, and now number 2, we have a very controversial above-ground septic system, is what's really going to be the topic of the day. But anyway, I work in the neighborhood. I'm a resident of the neighborhood and born and raised in the neighborhood. And I help the Historical Society from time to time, and we met with the current owner of the property, who was unable to be here this morning. And we met with him when he came to the commission first.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is your Fire and Life Safety Director. The condition has been corrected. It was a false alarm. All normal operation.
Great.
Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Anyway, moving on. The previous proposal was for a traditional house on what someone must thought perhaps was a traditional lot. Douglaston has of many interior lots. There's 600 and some odd homes in Douglaston. And in the Douglas Manor Association, which comprises the majority of the...
This is your Fire and Life Safety Director. The condition has been corrected. It was a false alarm. All building services have been restored to normal operation. Thank you and have a nice day.
Going.
Anyway, this building is outside the Douglas Manor Association. It is on the, as Ms. Schaefer pointed out, is on the waterfront side of Shore Road. What's interesting about Douglaston as a peninsula, I was reading up a little bit on it this morning. The district, when it was originally set up, it was set up with a contextual design. The district was, peninsula was cut into 20-foot lots. On the waterfront side, facing the bay, you needed 5 lots on Shore Road. Those must face Shore Road. It was an important lot. Those needed 5. You needed 100 by 100, a 20 by 100 lot. In the middle of the district, where it was not quite as premium as the shore, but better than the wetland side, you needed 4 zoning lots, which is an 80 by 100 minimum. And then on the wet side, the eastern side, you really only needed 3, or in some places 2 zoning lots were permissible to be built. And subsequently, the wet side was hilly. It was not the most glamorous views. It wasn't really developed a lot as Douglaston became more popular, and everybody moved into the larger houses. They built more elegant houses facing the water, and nothing really happened on the bay side. But something did happen. I'm sorry, nothing happened on the creek side. Something very important happened on the creek side. It was, to me, it's the working side. This is a painting, because it's the only image I could find, of the boatyards. There were 2 boatyards in England, Whitlow's and Peterson's, which ultimately became known as Svenson's. The Svensson brothers still work in the marine industry today. They move boats. I contacted the family trying to get some old documentation of these boatyards. But these boatyards were critical. Everybody who lived in Douglaston loved the water. Douglaston, yes, is a suburban community, but it's a waterfront community. It's surrounded by water, just like most of New York City is surrounded by water. And subsequently, the water side, the work side, really was, there was people, the elders, it was not uncommon to see duck blinds pulled up on the shores of Udall's Cove, or duck boats, because off-season, well, there were days when you could actually go duck hunting in Lunac Bay. But in some of the overhead shots, you'll see this is the area where the boatyard is. The property is directly across the creek from the boatyard. And that was a very important thing. And those boatyards, relics of the boatyards are still here. The bulkheads, the timber and wood bulkheads that held the earth back in order to create the creeks for the working areas. So basically, when the client came to me with his traditional house, with his living room and bedrooms facing the street, and his bathrooms facing the creek and the view, I said, you got it all wrong. It's completely wrong. And he had this septic system that had to be above groundwater, and he had a gigantic masonry stair that had to escalate to this high elevation above this, on top of this septic mound. I said, you got it all wrong. You've got to treat it as it's an entrance from the street level. The mound is a mound. The mound is just as if we're carving out a piece of the land in order to create a place for you to live like they had to do in the boatyard. So I broadcast the same timber and wood retaining walls to the front of the street. So the building is based on very similar kind of, I broke the buildings of Douglaston down in the area. These houses are directly across the street. When you look at them, they basically have a sidewalk, a street, a sidewalk, a low wall, a mound of earth to a house. And basically, that's sort of what I'm doing. I have a street, I have a low wall, I have a slightly higher mound of earth, but then the house. I flattened the components into something that's actually very rational and similar and appropriate and analogous of the other buildings in the district. It's a 2-bedroom house. It's less than 2,200 square feet. The DEC regulations say that the building cannot exceed 20% of the lot area. It's roughly a 60 by 100, a little larger than a 60 by 100 lot. It's under the zoning calculations. It does not, because of negotiations with the building department and the DEC and DEP, the cellar floor, which has a garage, through a garage, doesn't count. The cellar floor, ground floor, is truly just an entranceway. The garage goes front to rear. You enter into that point into a 2 double height entrance stair, which is behind the brick wall. You come up to the second floor. There's also an elevator as well besides the stair. The house does turn its back somewhat on the street because, to me, it was a bunch of boundaries that were contradictions. It's not in DMA, but it is next to the DMA. It's in a wetlands, but it's not really in a wetlands because you're allowed to build a house there. So it's traditional, but it's new, and it's also, it was meant to replicate and identify with the simple structures of simple things that happen in the district. And that's why I identified with the former windmill that was moved into the Alley Pond Creek in the 1970s. That was moved off-site.
That's some pretty big places in Douglaston, so I'm not too concerned with that.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Are there any questions? Yes, Roberta?
Oh, here it is. This is what.
Yes, the septic tank is under the mound. There's a restriction for wetlands, so it had to be a certain feet back from the wetlands. The ravine is considered a wetlands area, but the owner went through great lengths and over 20 years of negotiation with DEC to get an approval to place a 900-gallon septic tank and leaching pool under that mound. The property is all sand.
Yes, Diana, and then Michael.
Yeah, could you just address the retaining wall? There's different elevations of it, which is a little uncharacteristic for the district, and why you decided to approach it that way.
Well, we looked at it, again, I felt, here's just an illustration, simple illustration of it. We felt that with the CAD programs these days, I could, the engineer had to go to great lengths to actually plot his elevations according to the city regulations.
Yes.
So we knew where the tanks exactly were. So we placed the tanks, we calculated what our minimum lot coverage would be, minimum ground coverage would be, and then we tried to establish a lowest possible amount that we could come up with. The idea being, I couldn't really show it planted because then you're going to say, well, what are we talking about here? Obviously, it will be planted in some fashion with ground cover. I can't put trees on top of it because it has some large appurtenances underneath it. But the commission approved just down the road on the shore side of the Douglas Peninsula. We used to call it Biddle Bay, an edge where a very strong dominant hedge has been planted, and only the cut for the curb cut into the driveway access has been planted. So that's just I'm just saying, that's an edge condition. So I came up with an edge condition. We lowered the edge condition at the street. The wall is set back 3 feet from the curb line.
Right.
Property line is the curb line. That's what DEC and DOB allow us to do. So the curb is the property line. We have a 3-foot setback without a sidewalk, just with grass or planting. And then the wall, which is as low as we felt as low as we could make it, and then it goes up from there.
The question I was asking, because, I understand the need for the tank and, the way of address that. But it's the retaining wall is irregular in height. I'm assuming
it
that's.
It could be made uniform, but this would be
Then it'd have
the
to be
low, it would
higher.
have to then be at the highest level.
That's
straight.
what, I assume you're
Yes, we
doing
could
it.
drop it to 2 levels, certainly, we can make it more uniform, but it would err on the taller side.
Yes, I understand.
Michael?
Yeah, a few questions about that and some other things. So what you're saying is that one could have chosen to continue the grade down to the property line or the curb line, but you chose to set it back in order to create a place for planting?
Well, in fact, I don't think I would be able to get it down to 0 at the front curb.
How low could it go down to if you went?
I don't really know. Maybe
foot, a foot and a half,
A couple
2
of
feet?
feet down further, I still would have a wall in the front, probably 2.5-foot wall high.
And-
However, the neighborhood
Yeah.
felt the wall in the front would be inappropriate, and they asked for the push, in the previous submission, they asked for the pushback of the 3 feet, the local community.
Okay, and are there any other timber walls? I understand your rationale, but to try to bring the
Creek flow.
the creek scape inbound. Are there any other examples of that kind of, I guess, railroad tie type walls in the area?
There's a push in the area to use a heavy timber traffic barriers at our common properties to remove what DOT has put in over the years, which are the steel barriers and steel I-beams. And they've gone to it's not quite as dense as that, but they're basically comprised of 12-inch pilings with heavy timber cross members. So there's a move to more like you would see on a state parkway type structure. So it's sort of that, it's a rustic feeling, and yes, and I intentionally, I'm trying to broadcast that free stuff.
And a question about the materiality of the proposed house. You've got the brick, you've got the gray siding, you've got the white vertical siding, and then you have the trim. Can you tell us a little bit how you chose to come up with those 4 elements and why that you feel is contextual,
Well-
appropriate to the district?
Sure, I mean, basically, when I look at a lot of the other houses, I've got masonry bases, and I have shingled sidings, I have trim casings, and my difference is, yes, I've added the wide gabled end vertical board across the top. I chose the shape of the building specifically because I wanted to be able to keep the mass down. I mean, granted, I'm starting a story up to start this. So I didn't want to have a 2-story building on top of it. So it's really a 1.5-story building, and the dormers pop up. I mean, because I had this less than 2,200 square feet to work with, and even the gutters may be considered an unallowable projection into the shadow line. DEC is very critical about the drip edge. So there we get a lot of, like I said, a lot of boundaries, a lot of contradictions, a lot of.
Okay.
But to me, this was sort of the appropriate approach rather than the cute, rational, traditional house. It's not a traditional site by any means. It's a waterfront site. It's a creekfront site. It's a working site.
All right, other questions?
So
Yes.
basically, there are no other houses that have any kinds of mounts. I saw one that had a hill, but
Ones that are only because they're mounted because they're cut into the hill. But there are many wall mounds around the neighborhood, but they're basically on the hill. My version of this hill is that maybe Douglas Road was cut and that the hill continues. This is the property directly, these 2 properties are directly across the street. And they mound down, and if I started up there and came across to the property, Douglas Road was probably cut. There's talk about a road widening.
If someone builds to the left of yours, they're gonna have to essentially do the same thing.
They cannot. That is in the park.
Oh.
This is not in the park.
But
If they
a
did.
similarly located
Yes,
house is gonna have to,
the downside is the 6 houses that are there, their septic systems are sitting in groundwater.
right.
And the downside is their finished floor elevations could never be replicated should those houses become distressed. They would have to be raised to meet the new state and city laws.
Go ahead, Wellington.
Are you saying to the north of you that lot is not available to you, is actually parkland?
Yes, that's correct. This is probably one of the last building lots.
You are the last.
Yeah. probably so.
A couple of observations. Obviously, you're between a rock, proverbial rock and a hard place because typically this area does not percolate well, and that's why the lots are 10,000 square feet, 100 by 100. And even at that, I remember doing the perk test, it's very hard. So is that why you limited the, the other thing that I noticed is that this is a very popular walking path for people that want to take a look at the shore and then loop around. So I don't want it to repeat like Staten Island, where a lot of places have no sidewalk, and this is, I guess you have no choice. So are you, have you explored any other alternative to or is this the only thing?
This is it. As a matter of fact, even the, I have it in my bag, but even the septic tank or the leaching pool had to be modified in order to clear the, so it's not a complete round. It would be cut and modified.
Okay, why don't we take testimony? Christabel Goff?
Christabel Goff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. As staff noted, this has been here before. It's an exceptionally difficult and perhaps impossible site. I know the Commission doesn't like to say, no, you can't do anything. It's an unsafe position legally. But goodness, this is difficult. It may be impossible to build even a two-bedroom house on this site without doing violence to the nature of the district and the views that really brought people here in the first place. So I don't think that we can approve what is being proposed today any more than what was proposed before. Perhaps a small cabin could be fitted in somewhere, but the septic tank situation really takes it way to the edge of the realm of what is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Zay?
Barbara Zay of the Historic Districts Council. Douglaston is characterized by its suburban setting with freestanding homes in various vernacular styles situated in a park-like setting. There have been several new houses built in Douglaston that honor the neighborhood's character, and this proposal could benefit from further study of such examples. What is proposed here neither blends in nor seeks to respectfully introduce a new and inventive idea. It seems to ignore its surroundings with its clunky proportions and irrational window pattern. Romantic roof lines are a common feature in Douglaston, but the proposed house's peaked roof is negated by the presence of large dormers that flatten the roof line, giving the house a box-like silhouette. The cedar cladding is an appropriate material choice, but our committee questions the gloomy gray stain color. HDC would ask that the applicant be required to come back with a more inspired or referential design. Our committee also felt that the landscaped berm meant to cover up the septic system is a major interruption to the streetscape. The berm looms up from the low, flat upland edge of Udall's Cove, which is a strange juxtaposition with the flat landscape of the adjacent properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold Golubov?
Harold Golubov. I live at 371 Grosvenor Street, 1 block from the above property, in a building designed by Josephine Wright Chapman in 1916 and designated as a principal landmarked house by the LPC. The building proposed at 3211 Douglas Road, no matter what the design, cannot be in keeping with the serenity of Douglas Manor, when the main edifice facing the road will not be any kind of architectural design, but a very large mound of earth, nearly 7 feet in height and easily 12 feet in width, which is a fifth of the width of the property. These are not my estimates, since the architect's drawings have no dimensions on them. I'm basing the size of the mound on the table shown below, which is on a piece of paper that I've given you, for a low-profile 1,000-gallon concrete septic system. The table shows a low-profile tank, which is 120 inches in length, 67 inches in width, and 57 inches in height. This mound of earth will be a huge blockage to the eye and body as we pass by each day, intended to hide the carcass of an above-ground septic system and leaching field for a house that can't allow any incursion into the soil for fear of polluting the wetlands it will be built upon. The residents of Douglas Manor worked very hard to attain landmark status for just the kind of protection we need now from development on this property. I'm hoping that landmarks preservation will live up to its name. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia Shouk?
Good morning, all. I'm Julia Scheck from the Architecture Committee of the Douglaston and Little Neck Historical Society. The present owners of 32-11 Douglas Road in the Douglaston Historic District came into possession of the vacant lot more than 20 years ago. In 2011, the first plan for development was submitted to the Commission for approval. There was a broad challenge to the prospect of construction on the fragile shoreline of Udall's Cove with an unnatural hill and wall at the curve line of Douglas Road, a narrow, winding, and well-traveled perimeter road. There was a complete lack of support for the design of the proposed house as well. The Commission did not approve the plan. In 2013, a second proposal with minor accommodations, such as further setback from the road and a different design, was also denied approval. Now here is a third proposal for development of the property, different but subject to the same flaws: an invasion of the wetlands, adherence to today's requirement for above-ground cesspool with an unnatural hill and wall, false topography, and a building design that, while perhaps thoughtfully conceived, belongs in another place. The existing buildings in the district on the east side of Douglas Road, north and south of 32-11, came about before the present regulations were in force for sanitary installation in an area without a sewer system and are therefore conventional in grade. The proposed plan for 3211 Douglas Road is a complete departure from the flow of this line and creates an irrevocable context disruption. We ask the Commission to deny approval of the project. The circumstances cited above surely indicate that this property is no longer eligible for acceptable district development. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Arad?
Good morning. I too had a difficult time finding a dimension on the drawings, but I did find one on the engineer's drawing. It calls out existing grade at 9 feet and proposed grade at 17 feet. So an 8-foot tall mound on the street. I brought a measuring tape with me just to show the Commission what an 8-foot tall mound would look like, with a retaining wall made of timber in front of it. I don't think it is appropriate to do something like this to a street, which is a public space, which is part of what a historical district is. As the architect himself told us, this building turns its back to the street. And I think that is evident in the elevation along Douglas Road. You know, to suggest that there is any affinity between an artificial mound on the street and the natural topography across the street is laughable, unfortunately. And to suggest that the single wood rail that we're advocating for elsewhere in the development for the perimeter road bears any similarity to a retaining wall, which is more appropriate for materials building yard, I think is misleading. I think we have a fundamental issue here which has little to do with architecture, which has to do with a septic system. And we're trying to hide it, and not very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? All right, Community Board 11 notes. Okay, so they had a few comments. One was that the objections were made to the wall along the curb line of Douglas Road, which is very narrow. The wall is a hazard for driving public because it's at the curb line of Douglas Road. The designer should try and set back the wall at least 2 feet behind the curb. The flood resiliency text amendment recommends front yard slope to be no more than 2 vertical and 5 horizontal. The proposed slope for the filled area is 7 vertical to 12 horizontal, which is steeper than the requirements. And the third comment they had was that the committee questioned the appropriateness of the architectural design in the landmark district. So those were the comments. Yes. Are there questions? Yes. Are there questions for, you have a question for the applicant, Adi, right now, or? Yes.
Yeah.
You could come forward, please.
Had you considered, I mean, it seems to me that there are a lot of issues, as has been noted. But for me, it's yes, the mound is tall, but it's not so much that it's tall. And yes, the timber is, everything about it is false and is, you can sort of smell the treated formaldehyde or whatever it is that's used from this distance. But it's more about the fact that the mound is then cut or made even tighter, smaller, because you have to get the garage in there. And so if, I just ask a question for everyone. If the mound was there, and forget this, the texture of the retaining wall for now, but the mound actually extended the full width of the house. So you didn't get a garage. You didn't get a driveway. And this was sort of a little cottage shack, sort of tucked behind this new landscape grade. And you had to walk to the front door if the owners could. Would that make the grade of the mound a bit lower, a bit more shallow? And is that something that you can stand?
Sadly, it's not permissible by zoning. I have to provide one off-street parking outside of the front yard.
Problem.
This is your backyard, like you said.
Well, yes, but
No, but it has to have
technically,
access.
I agree. I totally agree with that. But that I don't know what the building department will waive under construction reconsideration. I can't speak for the building department, but yes, it is. I like to see the backyard because, again, when you see the view out towards the creek and to the east, it's just spectacular. But that being said, I have to provide a parking. Many new houses that were built in the district have ridiculous garages under the house where they have extreme retaining walls cut into the landscape. Many of them are approved by this commission as well. And the walls are absurd. As a matter of fact, the walls become so absurd, they become a local fight. Because do you protect the wall with a fence or a guardrail? And is a guardrail considered a fence? Because the DMA says that you're not, that's the local association, that you're not allowed to have fences in the front yard. So things that have been approved require things that are not permissible by the locals. But so it's I would say yes, sure. Without a driveway, it would be a completely different structure, absolutely a different structure. But I can't achieve that.
Can we talk a little bit about just the location of the septic tank? Because that's what's driving the mound, which is in the front, and also the most visual in the neighborhood.
I have the paperwork that shows the approval by the DEC where it exists.
Right, but let me.
We can talk about it, sure.
Right. So, are there other locations on the site?
No, what happens is
How does this work?
What happens
Yeah.
when you're on a creek front or waterfront property? DEC comes in and stakes the wetlands edge.
Okay.
And then a surveyor has to come in and then identify and stake the 100-foot setback from the wetlands edge, because that's where you can no longer put you can't be closer to 100 feet of the wetlands boundary.
Okay.
So this particular location of the septic tank and pool is just outside the 100-foot boundary. Or the tank can be in because the tank is watertight, it doesn't spill. But the pool is outside the 100-foot boundary line.
Okay, and the house can be within the 100 feet, is that
Yes,
correct? Okay, so you're forced to put this on the front of the house because it cannot be in...
Because there's two regulations, all septic systems must be in the
Okay,
front.
and what are the dimensions of this septic tank? What are we talking about?
I believe that it's a round, this one is a round, I'm pretty sure it's either a...
Okay, but height, what do...
I don't know, again, I have the paperwork with me, I couldn't tell you off my memory. I'm
Right,
not the
but-
architect for the septic design.
Okay, but this is driving the height of the mound,
Yes,
so
correct.
is that... oh,
Dimensions are on this exhibit.
okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, it exists. The most important height with the septic system is the height above groundwater. No leaching can be within 3 feet of groundwater. That's why everything comes up out of the ground. It's because you can't, the groundwater is a few feet down from grade. When somebody identified 9 feet elevation, groundwater is down to 5 feet.
Now, I'm going to suggest something which I don't know if that's the right answer either, and I don't know what the... Right, so the dimension, okay, there's two round things, is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay. So if that was put somewhere, but
Not that I can-
suppose you put it
that's-
around a shed or something, and you had the, I don't
Oh,
know.
no, it needs- but the problem, the reason how it works is that it needs the earth.
I
because
see,
it's
okay.
Graphically, the solids stay in the tank, the liquids spill over
Okay, all
into
right.
the leaching pool, leaching.
It has to be surrounded.
Through sand and it's filtered, yes. Septic system 101.
Does it take up the entire space? I mean, the size of.
Pretty
the
much,
two tanks?
pretty much,
And
yeah.
it can't be turned, 90
Now, the problem is, it's gotta be as close to the street as possible in order to be out of that 100-foot boundary line. That's what's holding it, what's holding it.
All right, and, just in terms of the DEC requirements, is there a possibility of waiving that requirement? It's a set in stone, whatever, there's no
It's pretty
practical,
much this, in fact, I believe that this septic system is approved under a waiver as it is because it's a 6,000 square foot lot. But because it was a pre-existing lot, it does not fall under the current regulation of, as one of the commissioners pointed out, of 10,000 square foot requirement, minimum lot size. So it's already a substandard lot based on its age and what it was applied.
and does the septic tank does it vary in size with the size of the home and the capacity of the home?
Smallest one you can do is 900 gallons sitting here.
And yours is?
It's either 1,000 gallons or 900 gallons.
Okay, so it's within that. Okay. Yeah, Michael?
More technical questions, sorry for all that.
Go ahead.
All right, it seems to my eye, the more troubling of the two submerged elements is the seepage pit, which is closer to the street, which seems to be dictating both the retaining wall, height, slope at the street, et cetera. I really know very little about septic systems, but my neighbor tells me that that the seepage pit is there to distribute the material after it goes into the septic tank, and that is often also accomplished with a field of pipes. Can you not use the pipes in this location?
Field pipes do work. I actually did that at a new house in the district recently, the last new house I did in the district. I don't believe there's enough area to do the field, and that's the problem, is that you have to do it dispersed through.
It's not enough area.
Not enough area. It's flat, it's a horizontal.
If you kind of
system.
could you combine the two? I mean, because it seems to me like if there were a way to technically reduce the size of the seepage pit, you might be able to modify the terrain in such a way that you might not need the retaining wall at the front.
While
least reduce
they
it.
have approved leaching fields, don't have the technical ability or authority to say if they could or if there's enough room right now, based on the
Okay.
square footage volume required of the seepage.
Okay.
All right, but I think it may be worthwhile if you're not the person to.
Well, it's a pretty big sign. I mean, on the house that I did do, it's a 20 by 40 foot area. It's an 800 square foot area. That's,
Are we really looking at an 8-foot mound when we're walking by the street, as was pointed out?
I think you're looking ultimately at a mound of earth that has a wall and then it's rising up.
How tall is the wall?
4, probably.
But it's the height of the garage top, right? So the garage.
Yeah, the garage is 6'8". So yeah, well, sure. I mean,
It's more than.
Yeah, I mean, this says existing grade is 9.36, proposed is 17. But
So,
again,
but I think also if you look at the section, the mound is
That's what I
not
wanna ask.
8 feet at the entrance
Exactly.
of the,
it's 30 feet back or 25
well, no,
feet back.
the way it's shown over here is that 8 feet seems to go all the way out to the front and drop suddenly. Yes, as opposed to a more gradual slope where you do not, because of the location of the tanks, which is in fact over there.
Can I return to the parking issue? I assume if you have to have parking off the street, why is it, though, that it has to end up in a garage inside of the building? It seems to me like it could be a pad, it could be a cut into the landscape at the dimension of a car, right, width, so that you could actually, do what I'm proposing, which is to extend this mound and thereby kind of reduce the slope in front of the house.
But parking on top of it which again puts me in an R12.
I'm not saying on top, I'm saying sort of into it, but not the full depth into the, up to the house itself and into the house.
Technically, R12 is supposed to be outside of the front yard setback, the 20-foot front yard setback. That's why I can't-
Outside the front yard
So I
setback.
have to be 20 feet back. and building's only 25 feet from my feet back. Site plan?
All right. Yes.
Yeah, look, he's just.
Yeah, maybe, towards the back, there might be a space there that, has to be 1816.
But Aryan, just, would that actually reduce the height?
No, the height would
It would
still-
just spread it over
Yeah, she's
along the
talking about making it
frontage?
look more gradual is what she's talking about. It
And
still
for it
would
to
be
resolve
high
in
at the other end, yeah.
in the unbuilt site to the north.
She's thinking that the
Okay,
South, sorry.
abruptness is an issue as
That way.
well as its size.
No, north, you're right.
So north, yeah.
I have another.
Okay, yes,
Make
Fred.
it look more natural.
At the risk of redesigning for you, which I hate even thinking about doing really, but I think this is a real problem.
Yeah.
And I think the testimony has sort of brought it out, the neighbors' testimony and so forth, and I think they parallel some of my own thoughts. I just want to say also that, some of the most inventive small houses that I've ever seen in my life have been on very problematic lots. And they've risen to some extraordinary degree of creativity to overcome those problems. And they don't necessarily always just look to what's in the district or, immediately what's around. They're challenged by, the challenge of the site. So I'm just wondering if, I go back to that incredible water mill too and think, gosh, isn't that a wonderful water mill? Not to recreate that sort of thing or a shingle-style house necessarily of 1890s, but I'm just wondering if this mound maybe should be thought of in a different way. Instead of a blob of earth which will forever have erosion problems and grass not growing on it problems and how are you going to mow it and all the rest of it. I'm just thinking, and maybe it's completely inappropriate to say, oh, those wonderful houses in the Berkeley Hills or some other places that have waterfront and hills and so forth. And I'm wondering if this mound couldn't be treated maybe as a raised terrace that's not all slopey, but a raised terrace. Yes, there are no raised terraces in this neighborhood, but if we can't have something that really is very much fits in, at least we should have something that is an excellent piece of architecture. And I'm just wondering if that a raised terrace, which is usable off the living room, I guess that would be in the front, is somehow set back a little bit. Maybe it's contained by, I think it's brick that you have on the lower course of the building. Maybe the brick surrounds it and comes out and encloses it, and it's all part of an integrated idea rather than a buried animal out there in the front yard, but more of an integrated idea. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just am not quite prepared to approve this thing with a few tweaks today, just personally stated.
Yes. Michael?
Can I ask, maybe this is a naive question, the height of this mound is determined by the dimensions of the tank, correct?
Yeah, and the elevation, height of the elevation.
Okay, so then and this is a standard tank that you buy from the standard septic tank company?
It might be a custom tank.
Okay, well, what are the possibilities of redesigning the tank so that it is wider rather than higher, so that the mound can be reduced in height?
It's, somebody want to, here it is, yeah.
Like I said, the DEC approval is the DEC approval. There's really very little I can do about that DEC approval because of the setbacks here.
Well, no, I understand the setback, but
No, I don't, I have to, we could adjourn it and I'd have to go back and.
if I've got a boat and I've got a holding tank in that boat, I can have that holding tank designed any way I want to fit in my sloop. And I'm just wondering if you can get a custom tank made that would alter the design of your mound?
That's also about the two tanks,
Okay.
discussion.
And
with the
exactly,
septic
Thank you.
engineer.
and just in response to Commissioner Bland's great idea, wish it's doable, totally undoable, because I'm not allowed to build any kind of structures on the property lines. And that's the problem, we have a 60 by 100 lot, I don't have the luxury of space, is that I can build, I can build a low retaining wall, I can't build an 8-foot high terraced wall on a property.
No, but you could build a paved horizontal surface that was integrated into the landscape that...
Not in R1-2, perhaps in the zero lot line district. but not
You
in
can't
R1.
have terraces, you can't, what, you
It could
can't
be a
have
grass
paved- You can't
terrace.
have paved patios in your front yard in an
Not,
R1 too?
not on top of a concrete structure, no.
It'd be a grass terrace.
But it's not.
But anyway, that's a debate for
But
a
it's-
zoning issue. That's not a
Yeah.
process.
All right, are there other questions? Okay, why don't...
No,
yes.
no, so-
Yeah, okay,
so-
why don't we close the hearing and let's go to comments? Yes, Diana. go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree that, obviously this berm is the issue, this huge problem, and it's, being required by the DEC, and I don't see DEC changing their regulations. There's probably Udall's Cove and the wetlands next to it besides the waterfront, there are other constraints here, but nonetheless, obviously, I think I'd like to see some examination, as others have suggested, with the septic engineer. What are the alternatives, if any, because you have the two sections of the septic system, and whether it is possible to lower it in any way and integrate it more. The real issue is, can you have this seem like a more natural bridge to the adjacent wetlands and park, so that it doesn't seem like just a mound sitting there? And the suggestions about trying to make it look more an integral part of the landscape, even if, and I understand, but you can't build a terrace maybe on top of the concrete structure, and also it's got to have access to the septic system to clean it, by the way, or repair it. So, but at the same time, if the architect can look at ways to make the landscaping look more connected to the house and appropriate to the street, and also investigate with the septic engineer any kind of alternatives. Maybe you could bring him with him if he needs to, anyway, to really integrate this better.
I would...
We didn't really talk about the materiality. I think the other thing is that maybe the architect should bring some, and I happen to like the idea of the general gray and white on the waterfront, but if you could bring some other examples of waterfront houses or other houses in this community district that might not be right here, but it is a special location, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be brick or something, but showing some other examples from the district when he returns, that would be my other thought.
Yes, John.
I think I'm going to be taking this in a slightly different direction. I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place on this property, because I hate to be, I'm loath to be someone who says you have a piece of property and there's nothing you can do with it.
Yeah,
and I understand this has a lot of constraints. But on the other side of that, I look at the face of this building towards the street, and indeed that's the face that the community will see. That's the face of the historic district. I realize that they want to face the water, and that's the front of their house. But it looks like any of 100,000 houses on Staten Island that have their back to the street, and they're not in historic districts. I don't like those, and I don't like this any better. And so it seems to me kind of a poster child for the direction a house should not look. Does that mean that he shouldn't have the front of the house towards the water, that front of the house look like the front of the house? That's fine. But I think my core problem is when you look at the side that faces the street, it actually looks like the back of a house. I don't mind that that's the way they want to live, but it could, forgetting about the mound and all that, it just isn't designed to look like the front of a house. And I think if you look at, what page is this? I don't even know if these pages are numbered, but there is a page where you actually see pretty clearly the drawing of the house that's there, and then the drawing of their house, and and I can imagine coming down this street, seeing front, back, front. And that's my problem. It doesn't seem like any effort was made to make it look, forgetting about the mound, like it's actually facing a street. Even if you want to live like it's the back of your house, it ought to look like it faces the street.
Okay.
I agree with that. That was my second issue. It's required to be honest, ask them out. But I think that in terms of living, as I said, you can live as if this is your main side of the building because there's the water there. But I don't think you should subject the entire neighborhood to making it your building, because you only consider that a backside, not a major side, because it is a street. That's the street, and that should be. But I also think that the idea that was mentioned by Commissioner Bland about looking at it is the tanks could be some structure. That should be looked at. I don't know all the rules and regulations, but it just seems that you're going to have something that big that maybe it could not be a mound of earth, but that it really could look as it had some function that related to a building. And it is something that's a deck or something, but it depends again on size. And maybe round doesn't work, maybe square. I don't know if you can have squares.
Okay, other comments? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said so far. I think I'll expand upon it just a little bit. I think that Fred's comments about the front yard are spot on, and I think that by viewing this construction as part of the construction of the house, by integrating the design of the front yard as an extension of the house and not viewing it as something that I will drape some dirt over and hope that it stays there for more than a season or two, is a much better way to go to try to bring this unwieldy blob into the composition of the house. And I think that has to be accompanied by a joining of the technical side of this project with the aesthetic side. I think that the architect should work closely with the people who did the approval for the DEC to figure out if there is a way to reduce the size of the seepage tank, move things around in such a way that the urbanistic consequences of the placement of these elements can be mitigated. And in terms of the design of the house, I agree also with other comments that have been said. I think part of the problem why the house feels like it's got its back is that it's hard to figure out where the front door is, and I think there's something purposeful about that. The front door is actually tucked in at the bottom corner, around the corner from this kind of L-shaped window, and so you say, well, you can't see that, but what you can see is the patio door up on the hill, which looks like it might be the front door, but you can't get to it. So I think that the house needs to kind of up its game in terms of the design to both. I think it's fine to have a relatively dense, solid front and a relatively open, glassy back. That's done every day. I mean, there's probably not a house on the entire south shore of Long Island that doesn't have that way of developing itself. But you still have to respect. I mean, look at you brought up the windmill. The windmill's the perfect example of what this house should be more like, which is something that is simple, something that is clear, this has all these materials, all these window types, none of which seem to resonate with the neighborhood. Banks of casements, and then these very squat rectangular windows on the top. I think that the house is very kind of fussy and needs to be. It doesn't need to be a historicized house at all. I think that it can be a very beautiful contemporary house, but it has to have those qualities of scale, proportion, detail that make the district a distinctive and historic place.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. I think when one is confronted with a new home in a district, I think it poses very fascinating challenges. And clearly this one does. I agree with my colleagues over here. I think Fred said that sites like this, which pose so many complexities to it to build, really requires a more creative solution. And I think the Commission clearly doesn't feel comfortable in sort of supporting this in any way or shape or form right now. So I think that the issues have been laid out, but I can go through them very quickly. I mean, clearly, the Commission recognizes that there's some practical difficulties of how to deal with the issues of DEC. However, I think it's worthwhile to speak with your DEC consultant and really look at, in the spirit of being more creative and coming up with a building and a design that's more integrated, is really worth looking at something which can work, including sort of a more custom-made system. I think there have been comments about the treatment once you have that and you have it placed within the site plan to try and integrate the landscape much more to the home and to these sort of separated pieces in a more integrated manner. And I think that was what Adi was also talking about, of somehow just integrating it and recognizing that it has many functions. It speaks to the street, which is very much a part of the district. It's very, very visual, very experiential, and I think a lot of thought should be given to that. And then you have the home itself and the aesthetics of the home and the vocabulary of the home that has to speak, whether it's in a contemporary manner or in a more historical manner, but should speak to the district in a similar way as other buildings. And so I would also agree with the comment that John had made about the front home and recognizing that programmatically inside you do whatever you want to, but I think that the aesthetics of that home and the vocabulary of the home has to speak to the district in a more, I think, appropriate manner, in a more consistent manner as well. So that's what happens with new homes. Comments, none of us want to design your home for you, but I think there's been a lot of comments here which should give you some direction about how to rethink this response. Okay? All right, we can go to the next case.
Yes. Very well put.